Hello. My name is Ryu Spaeth. I'm an editor at the New Republic. Thank you very much for coming. This is part of a series of events that the New Republic is doing at the Strand with authors of new books. I'm talking tonight with André Aciman, whose new book is Find Me, which is the sequel to the best-selling and beloved Call Me By Your Name. There will be books on sale at the back, and André will be signing them afterwards, so please do make sure you get one. So what we're going to do is we're going to start actually with a few questions about Find Me, and then André is going to read a short passage from the book.
Very short.
And then we will open it up to questions from the audience. So for those who haven't read Find Me, it's divided into three main sections. The first is about a romantic relationship between an older man and a younger woman. The second is about the relationship with two men, one who is older and another who is younger. And the third is what people are waiting for, the reunion.
Oh, no. Oh, you know already. Okay.
Between Elio and Oliver.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk about the first section first, the relationship with this older man who is actually Elio's father. And there is this idea that occurs again and again in the book, that we have these multiple lives that coincide with one another, that run parallel to one another, a kind of real, truer life, and then a day-to-day, you could say more superficial life. And time makes a bit of a mockery of that real life because it sometimes emerges only when it's too late, or it feels like it might be too late. And I was wondering if you could talk about that sense of tardiness a little bit and how it might relate to, these two relationships between an older man and a younger woman and an older man and a younger man.
Yeah. The driving point is that we all have what I call might have been lives, could have been lives, that we hope happen, but we fear may never happen, and we're happy that they never happen, but we still hope they might happen. So if you follow my drift, all right, these are, and we have many more of these. We just don't have one, or we don't have one main life, the ordinary, day-to-day, mundane, measly life that we all live on a day-to-day basis. Then there's the other, there could have been, and it's a far more picturesque life than the one we're given to live. And as a writer, you drift from one to the other, back and forth, and then you realize, wait a minute, the might have been life has another aspect to it. It has another might have been. And you realize that we really have, at the very least, as I've said in one of my books, 4 different lives that we live concurrently. We don't have names for them. We don't know what they look like, but we know we drift from one to the other. And so what I wanted to do with the first story, or the first part of the book, which is called Tempo, which means time, it's to show how a person who was sort of in his probably late 50s meets a woman in her early 30s and on a train, and God knows why it happens, but it does happen in life. He doesn't expect it. In fact, he doesn't even think it could happen, so he's given up on that possibility. But sure enough, she's aggressive enough to make him realize that you have another life, and I am part of it. And I love that option, that this older person feels suddenly revived, summoned to live life all over again, despite the fact that he had a wife and he has a son who's having a brilliant career and will meet the son again. But and the son also has the same thing happen. He's older now and he meets an older man who also has given up on life and finds that these are wonderful miracles in life. And they happen. They do happen all the time.
Yes, I think, it's kind of the great romantic idea of this book and Call Me By Your Name is that you do find that real life. You do find that person, and in a way, and through that, end up kind of finding yourself. And I was wondering, you know, is that how you would define love, as that sort of perfect alignment of time and life?
Well, love works one way and time works another way, and life also decides that it's not going to play along. So, and we all know what that's like when the fantastic opportunity occurs, but you can't. You're on an airplane and you're changing planes, and this person is not going to fly with you. And I mean, that happens all the time. Life is that way. But it is wonderful when somehow there is a coincidence. And that's the moments in life that I think are the best ones in life, where you say, you know, someone has kind of arranged this because it feels too staged. It's too perfect. Of course, if you're like me, you say the other shoe is going to fall in a minute. Okay? I know. I'm going to say something wrong and this other person is going to disappear. And they don't disappear. Okay, when is it going to happen? When is this person going to... But it's wonderful when suddenly you feel there is something. And the book sort of plays with the idea that there is something which you might call fate. Somehow there is some authority up there that has decided, I'm going to make this happen for you. And you say, no, it won't happen, can't happen. No, I will. And that's what happens.
You know, I think it's a marvelous idea, and I'm very susceptible to it myself.
Oh, because we're all romantic.
Yes,
let's face it.
exactly.
We're bourgeois and romantic. Goes without saying.
But what do you think that says about the rest of life? The moments that aren't those perfect moments. Like, what does it mean? What is the significance then of that? The quotidian moments.
Well, the quotidians are quotidian. They're day-to-day things, and that's fine. I'm trying to... There was a film made by, I think, a Czech director, very old film, where most of life happens in black and white. And then that magical moment comes and it's colored. And you know when your life is colored, and you know when it's not. And most of us live gray areas, gray lives, black and white film. Occasionally, on a particular weekend, yes, it can become colored. It's colorized, in fact. That's great, too. But then you go back to, you know, ordinary day-to-day life. Take the subway in the morning, go to work, come back, have dinner, go to sleep, blah, 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 blah. And that's life, too.
Do you want to read your passage?
I want to, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me introduce the idea, because the passage, it's okay. It happens to me too, all the time. It's okay. The passage, basically, the father of Elio is in this new situation with a woman called Miranda, and they're in Rome. And he's basically taking her to what he calls vigils. For those of you who know little towns in Europe, old little towns, usually have a little corner in a wall in the street or in an alley where there's a little virgin with a lit candle or lit light, and people stop and they do the sign of the cross and they keep walking away. And the idea is that these are like vigils. And for the father, he likes to go back to places that were dear to him once upon a time. And he goes there not knowing exactly what he's looking for, but he knows that he has to go back. And the only simile that I can think of, because I know all of you are guilty of it, even though you won't claim it, is how many of you have called your old phone number that is no longer yours? Okay? That's a vigil, okay? You have no business calling your old phone number because you're not going to answer, but you still do it. So the father takes Miranda on a walk, and he shows her where he lived. And the next day, he is now joined by Elio, who is his son, who's a pianist, who is basically now becoming a kind of prominent pianist, and he's going to become more famous. And now they're all three walking together. And the father is telling us this. When we reached Via della Pace, I thought that Elio was about to take us to one of my favorite churches in the area. Instead, no sooner had we sighted the church than he made a right turn and took us to Via Santa Maria dell'Anima. Then, after a few steps, and just as I'd done with Miranda the day before, he stopped at a corner where a very old lamp was built into a wall. I never told you this, Dad, but I was drunk out of my mind one night. I had just vomited by the statue of Pasquino and couldn't have been more dazed in my life. Yet here, as I leaned against this very wall, I knew, drunk as I was, that this with Oliver holding me was my life. That everything that had come beforehand with others was not even a rough sketch or the shadow of a draft of what was happening to me. And now, 10 years later, when I look at this wall under this old street lamp, I am back with him, and I swear to you, nothing has changed. In 30, 40, 50 years, I will feel no differently. I have met many women and more men in my life, but what is watermarked on this very wall overshadows everyone I've known. When I come to be here, I can be alone or with people, with you, for instance, but I'm always with him. If I stood for an hour staring at this wall, I'd be with him for an hour. If I spoke to this wall, it would speak back. That's short. Thanks.
Thank you. No, I love that passage. And, the other great romantic idea of this book, and also Call Me By Your Name, is that, you have one great love in your life, but only one. And I was wondering, if you, as a person, believe that's true, or is this an invention for this particular couple that served kind of your purposes in the book?
Oh, it was all fake. No, I think that most of our loves, the ones that never go away, are the ones we never ended or we never even started. Those sort of keep nagging you for the rest of your life. And what is amazing is that the very mistakes you made, that first love, are the mistakes that you will continue to make for the rest of your life. That does not change. So you're still an idiot, okay? But I think that the loves that the one love that I've had goes back so many years, I'm embarrassed to say, but they never go away. They're there because they were never even started. And those are the loves that stay because it's business unfinished.
And perhaps that invisible life or that life that is not there.
So it belongs to that other dimension where so much of us takes place.
Well, I want to talk about that other dimension a little bit. There's another passage in the book where we're now with Oliver, and he's imagining a conversation with Bach. And Bach is saying to him that music is the sound of the unlived life. And I wanted to ask you is that what art is for you? Kind of an examination of the world that sort of lies on the other side of reality?
Well, a lot of people will tell you, and they're misguided, okay, that life and art are the same thing. They talk to each other. I don't believe it. I think that life is one thing and art is totally different. But art steals from life all it can. But it has its own agenda and its own devices and its own bag of tricks that life knows nothing about. I do think that in many cases, art is, if you think about the joy that art can bring to us, like music, for example, it makes us better persons. You listen to a piece of music. If you listen to a piece of music by Bach, let's say, especially if it has organ in it, you're transported into some kind of imaginary church. You cannot think bad thoughts. You cannot even entertain something ugly. It's all about beauty. And so I think that music invites us to consider the better life, probably the better life that we never had a chance to live. And we'll never have a chance to live. That's okay. But it invites us to consider it. And I like the word to consider because it doesn't mean imagine. It means to reflect about it. How close we can get, and yet how we will never get there. And the joys that other people can bring us are fantastic, but nobody can bring us any happiness. It has to be in us to begin with. Nobody can make you happy. You have to be predisposed already to be happy. That's simple. So I don't believe in miracles. I think that we are the authors of our own miracles, if that could be possible. I'm not entirely convinced, but I can change my mind.
That particular, the reason why he's having this imaginary conversation with Bach is that he's heard a fragment of music and it reminds him of Elio. And, that reminded me of, the little phrase of music and in Proust, who I know you're an expert on. And in Proust, it's this, that little phrase is a mnemonic device that reminds Swann of his love for Odette and is tied up with, Proust's themes on the relationship between memory and life. And for me, like the connection between the music and life, and then art and the music, and then memory and the music. Could you talk a little bit how art and memory work together? Well,
the scene is, I was influenced, I wasn't influenced, I was stealing, okay? There's a wonderful moment in The Dead. How many of you know The Dead by James Joyce? Okay, there's a wonderful moment when he's with his wife and they're at a Christmas party and suddenly they hear somebody singing something and she changes moods right away. And she says, that reminds me, and he finds out later, that reminds me of a boyfriend I used to have. He stood outside my window, he caught a cold, and he died. And the husband doesn't know how to react to this because he's totally paralyzed, but he feels tears, and he says, these must be tears of love. Anyway, this is James Joyce writing this 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago. I wanted the music to summon up in Oliver's mind the memory of Elio playing that piece on the piano 20 years before. And the music, of course, brings up the memory, but he's also a bit drunk, which facilitates this kind of imaginary dialogue he has with Elio and an imaginary dialogue that he continues to have with Bach. He's going to be speaking to Bach. Imagine what a privilege that is. And Bach is going to tell you, sorry, sir, we don't do answers here. We just do questions. Okay. But so basically Bach is making fun of him. But there's a sense that music and art in general is far more important in our lives than we actually think, because it is a way of establishing order in our lives that does not exist otherwise. Art has that function, or it's that privilege of art to make us find order and beauty in our lives. There may not be much beauty in many lives, but art sort of rehabilitates whatever it is that life can not do. But it's the province of art. It's not the province of life to do that.
And do you think that's why you've chosen love as your subject in these two books, like because of that?
I think that I'm interested in love. I'm interested in sex too, by the way. And there's always sex in my books. But I think that attraction, I'm exaggerating, of course. But there's a wonderful thing about attraction, because attraction, maybe like art, reminds us that we are alive, that there is beauty in the world, and that there can also be desire. Because without desire, how many of us go through days without feeling any desire for anything? Not even for food and lasagna, okay? That's very sad, but I think that what happens in love basically stirs us up. And it's a possibility for greater happiness, for greater desire, for greater joy. And I embrace it that way. So there's always, I'm not a romantic, but I believe that love can actually direct us to what is the very best in life.
I think it's a more difficult question. if you've read Call Me by Your Name, you know what happens to Oliver. He has a conventional heterosexual marriage, and the book is tragic in that way. What are we to make of the other people in his life who really sort of go unexamined? What do we owe them? What does he owe them? Or is the thing that he owes most of all is primarily to himself and to this love that you're talking about? Like, what about those other people?
The other people being the ones that are not in the book?
Like his wife and his children who love him, and
Oh, okay. Oh, you're basically going the spoiler way. Okay, fine. Okay, fine. Okay, I just needed to know what we were doing. I think that,
or not spoiler, but there's a person who very much loves someone else.
We change. We do change. And many things make us not change or not want to change, but we do change. And a lot of us, in our earlier lives especially, are more unstable than later in life. I was extremely unstable, to put it this way. Basically, you have a relationship, and then you realize that this is not really working, or it worked for a while, it no longer does, I'm moving on. And there's no morality, there's no ethics to, no, you have to stay with your partner. That's unrealistic. That's false. You have to move on. When you have to move on, you move on. And I know it sounds a bit savage, but that's life.
And I think that's that's the message of this book too, and it comes through.
Right.
Comes through. You're talking about change, and I'll quote a little bit of what Oliver says when he's starting to think about Elio again, and he says, "I was sure of myself once. I thought I knew things, but all of a sudden he's plunged into doubt, and it sort of brings back this notion of time catching up to you and showing you that perhaps you've lived the wrong life, perhaps you've made the wrong decisions, but it feels like only the older man could have realized those things. And I wonder if you think you might have written that as a younger person, or your younger self would have written that.
No, he wouldn't have, because Oliver is a character who's very self-confident in the first book. He knows he's handsome, he knows he's attractive, he can have basically anybody he wants, and there's clearly a message sent through the whole book that he is, in fact, probably sleeping around a bit. And he's almost arrogant and unpleasant sometimes with his later. Who cares about people who say later that way? But as he gets older, he begins to say things like, I used to be able to do this. Why is that nobody's responding to me? I mean, he's invited a young man who comes with his partner to his party. He's invited this young woman who comes with her husband to the party, and he's clearly interested in both of them. And he finds that it's difficult. Somehow, I used to do this before. This was easy. Why has it become impossible? And it's also at the same time that he realizes that he hears the music and he says, I never was quite over Elio. We were always together. Even when we don't communicate, we're still together. We still think of each other. I know we do. And Elio says the same thing. I know we think of each other, even when we're not even writing to each other. And I think that's a wonderful moment in the book.
No, I agree. We've talked a little about Proust. You've talked a little bit about Joyce. What other writers were you influenced by or stealing from shamelessly when you wrote both these books? Because to me, it reads like very contemporary novels. They don't feel like they were, ripped out of the 20s in Europe. They do feel modern. So, and maybe you could talk about that as well.
Well, I'm clearly very interested in what goes on in writing. As you probably know, and I think I've said it too many times, and it's all over YouTube, I don't read contemporary authors for many reasons, but it's just that I'm always looking for something that many of them are unable to provide, which is fine. It's what I'm looking for may be totally imaginary. On the other hand, I do think that there are some writers who have given me things unbeknownst to them. In other words, you would never know. For example, there's a book that I've just written the preface for. It's called Olivia. It's written by Lytton Strachey's sister, Dorothy. And it was written when she was in her 60s, believe it or not. And she published it when she was in her 80s. And it's about a lesbian affair. And it's a beautiful short book that I read when I was a kid, and I loved it. And it stayed with me all my life. And so when I had to come up with a name for Oliver, I chose Olivia's name. So that's a book that I find influenced me immensely, even though the relationship between the older woman and the younger girl never occurs. They're both aware of it. They both know that there's a very powerful love between them, but they don't do anything. And so that is also a model for me, which is about strong relationships that are not necessarily consummated. But so I go for anything that is super analytical about relationships without necessarily the day-to-day business of domestic life, which I hate. I always make a joke about what do people who are together for years, what do they do on Sunday night? They do the laundry. Thank you. You know, I've said that. I mean, you do the laundry and you fold the towels and the sheets. I mean, this is very exciting, okay? Okay, so it's not what I want to write about. I want to write about powerful attraction, usually at the beginning of a relationship, though some relationships last a lifetime.
We were talking back in the green room about Edith Wharton, who is someone you're teaching now. And those books have that dynamic you're talking about, this sort of these two characters who are powerfully attracted but cannot be together. And Call Me By Your Name also has that dynamic. But do you think that still exists in contemporary society, those kinds of rigid societal forces that are pulling people apart? And how does that play into Find Me, which is a different book?
I don't think, I mean, I'm jumping to the answer. You haven't finished your question. My wife always tells me, you let the person ask you the question first.
No. Whatever interests you in the question.
No, it's amazing because it's an unanswerable question. It's very difficult to explain what the machinery behind the work is. And
I guess I'm asking, do you think those
I know the conditions today.
Right.
It's difficult to say, and I'll explain to you why. Because you think that we are a free society, but there are inhibitions of all kinds in life. Not just inhibitions against particular forms of sexuality. That's a given. We're over this, okay? I think we are. We should be. But there are other inhibitions that play. Timidity. Consider timidity. How many of you in this, don't raise your hands, please, but how many of you are shy? I think we're all not just shy, we're paralyzed by our shyness. And shyness is a factor that has nothing to do with social mores, with contemporary life standards and so on. We are shy. We are paralyzed and we don't move. And for many of us, there are many reasons why we won't move and why we won't take the plunge when the plunge needs to be taken. And one of the things that I admire so much about Elio is that for all his timidity, his irresolution vis-a-vis so many things, he does at some point knock at the window and say, I want to sleep with you. He does make the speech. However clandestinely he makes that speech, he makes it. So he has the courage occasionally to take the plunge, but not always.
It looks like I have time for one more question, and then we'll open it up to the floor. I love that idea of knocking on the window, and to me, these are sentimental books, and I mean that in the best way. And I wonder if you think, those kinds of books are timeless, of course, but I wonder if you think there's any sort of special resonance today or for maybe younger people, because to me it reads very much as an antidote to irony, cynicism, those kinds of things, and maybe you could talk about the role sentimentality plays.
Well, I think that, I'm looking at my readership, which I've been educated by the readers because they all write to me, and it's wonderful to hear how people react to my books. One of the things that many people have said is that I wish I had had that conversation with my father. That's the dominant theme. I wish, now my father's dead and I can never have that conversation, though I wish it could have happened. I wish my father had that conversation with me. That's the first one. The second one is that a lot of people feel that there's something very liberating about the kind of love. In other words, the typical villains of all gay stories are not there. Disease, bullying, violence, death, etc. These are not invited into the scene. They're not there. And so it frees people when they read the book. Many people read the book expecting, okay, there's going to be beating, there's going to be violence, there's going to be... No, it's not there. It's not part of the scenery. And they feel very freed about this. But also other people react to it and they say, this is and it's something that I didn't plan it this way, but it comes out. They say that there's something about the fluidity of sexuality in my books that people say, this is me. This is exactly who I am. This speaks to me because, I could be gay, I could be straight, I could be bi, I could be hetero, I could be this or that. There's so many variations. I could be any of those things. I am all those things. And what your characters, they say to me, your characters do is that they can move sort of seamlessly from one to the other without any of the horrible, stupid guilt feelings that you're supposed to feel. And I feel that people are liberated that way. It was not my agenda. I do not write with agendas. But it is a result of the books.
Thank you. And so now we'll take some questions from you guys, and there will be a mic that's passed around.
I felt that in your book, Call Me By Your Name, you had, in my eyes, perfected the relationship between Oliver and Elio. And
who?
The two men.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry.
And I felt that you took us from the beginning right to the end, and you showed us how their lives ended and where they were, and it was perfection. So I'm curious, what made you go back to them in your second book? Did you feel there was something left unsaid?
Yes, there was definitely something left unsaid. There was something left unsaid because the book was written in, as you probably know, in great haste. And because I was on contract for another book, and I had to go back to the other book, otherwise my publisher was going to kill me, okay? So because they had already given me the advance, which is the worst thing you can do to a writer, is give him the money first. He's not going to write it, okay? No, but I had to go back to the other book, so I wanted to finish this, but I was having a great deal of fun writing Call Me By Your Name. It was all writing with pleasure. I mean, I opened up all the sluices and I was going for it. In 3.5 months, it was done. But I felt that I wanted to know more about the father. The father really interested me because he was old, he had given up, but he wasn't old enough to give up. And what kind of a man makes that speech to his son, that wonderful moment when he makes the speech? And so I wanted to know more about him. And I wanted to see him in action, as it were. How he's reluctant on one hand, disbelieving on the other, and yet very eager at the same time. He can't control his hand. He touches her face, You're not supposed to do that to a stranger. But she doesn't mind, okay? I also wanted to know Elio. I mean, as soon as I finished the second book afterwards, I went back to Call Me By Your Name, trying to write a book about Elio in his 20s, early 20s. And I found myself, I'm writing Call Me By Your Name again. That was not good. So I had to let a lot of time go by. And eventually I ended up starting with the father and finding later Elio as a young man in Paris. And then I wanted to find out about Oliver. He's like this arrogant guy. What does he become? He's a father, he's a professor, he's married. Is he happy? I wasn't sure. I wanted to find out.
So, first of all, I just want to thank you for ever deciding to sit at your table and write Call Me By Your Name, because that book has helped a confused 21-year-old girl thousands of miles away from here come to terms with her first love story. It has helped me understand that that experience I had was in fact love. I mean, I don't know if you understand how much of an effect that has influence that has been on my life, but I just want to thank you for that. Another question that I have is a very dominant theme in all your love stories is that the protagonists have a visible age difference. So I just want to know why you decided to explore, relationships in that light. Is there any reason behind that?
No, there was no reason. In other words, it wasn't part of my program to have older people and younger people together. It came naturally that way, and that's the way I wanted it to be. But then when I think back, it would have been nice to have Elio's father on a train meeting an older person, and together they were going to talk about their grandchildren and about retirement and what kind of medical plan do they have. And I said, no, that's not interesting at all. It just didn't work. And having two young people together in their teens or 20s, I'm not interested in them because they're going to text it to each they're going to text to their friends while they're in bed together. I wasn't interested in that either. So I thought that it was, and I like the unconventionality, particularly the unconventionality of the relationship, because that allows each one to find in the other something that they don't have. And I love that.
Thank you. I was interested in what you were saying about the audience and the reader. And my daughter is 21, and I equally love your books. And it's been interesting for me to see what she gets from it. And I think you say in the book about life and time being out of sync. And I think showing that and the way you do that is very reassuring, particularly for young people. I was very interested as well in what you said about timidity, and for me it was how you dealt with touch that encapsulated that sense of timidity. There was a lot of almost touching, and it felt, but I might be wrong about this, that it was the younger person who overcame that sense of timidity.
It is the younger person who does, always. I don't know why. Maybe it's my fantasy, being older, But I think that it is wonderful when someone actually, reaching out to someone's body, hand, whatever. I remember when I was a younger man going to the movies with a girl, and you expected a scene to be kind of suspenseful, so that would allow you to reach out and hold her hand. It was just an excuse, okay? But basically, touching is difficult. It's not easy. You're crossing many, many boundaries. There are people who they're lucky. They're naturally sort of easily can touch you. They touch your arm, they touch your shoulder. Usually I kind of say, enough with the touching, okay? Because it becomes distasteful, I say. But it is a very important thing to reach out and touch. And at some point, it is legitimate to do it. Don't exaggerate, be cautious, but you have to do it. And that is crossing a line. And for me, crossing lines has always been a difficult thing to do. It's never been easy.
Hello. What is your best way to end your writer's block? I'm very curious.
Well, if you have writer's block, you alternate between, I love playing solitaire on the computer. Okay? You play solitaire once, twice, until, there's something about solitaire which is very unpleasant, is that when it's obvious you're winning, and you say, okay, should I finish this or not? But you play solitaire, music, and go back to the piece of your writing. Go back and sort of alternate constantly, because it's difficult to stay focused. There are moments when you have to do something on deadline, and that's fantastic for me because you got to get it done. There is no time to sort of tarry here. It has to happen. And usually, I remember one day I showed my son, I was writing an article, and I showed him like this much of it on the computer, and I said, it took me a week to write this. Just that little part. It was like about 10 lines. A week to write 10 lines. But then once you get into it, you begin to fall in love with the actual project that you didn't take seriously and didn't even like. You fall in love with it. You have to fall in love with it. And you know when that moment comes. And then you sort of slide into it. But it's not easy either. Writing is a difficult business. Nobody is born to be a writer, I think. I don't know if I've answered your question.
I had a question about your sentence structure.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get away with including so many words and so many forms of punctuation in these sentences that are actually paragraphs, and not have the reader get bogged down and have it seem run on? Is it the rhythm to it?
Yes.
Is there something about the rhythm? Because I noticed there's a rhythm. I've read 3 or 4 of your books, and there's a rhythm in there, all of them. Is that something that just comes naturally, or is that something that's taught and learned?
No, you don't. You don't learn it. It's basically, you create a rhythm because of the punctuation, because of the clauses. And you want to maintain so as you're writing, you're always thinking, if I'm going to read this out loud, this becomes second nature. If I'm reading this out loud, it better not stall or not lose the reader. You're constantly thinking of not losing the reader, but you want to also entice the reader with music. So with the music of your sentences, because when the reader gets trapped in your sentence, he begins to think that he is the one writing this. He's the one feeling this, not the character. Because now you've seduced the reader with music and with the cadence of the style itself, so that essentially the reader is with you. It's like when you go to hear a preacher who's very, very good. He may make no sense whatsoever, as my sentences sometimes make no sense. But they galvanize you, they excite you. You say, I'm with you, I'll sign, I'll give you money, I'll do anything. And then you say, what did he say? I don't know what he said, but it was fantastic. And that's exactly what it is. It's all about rhythm and repetition. And if you look at my sentences, they're very, I think the figure of speech is anaphoric. In other words, you repeat the same word or the same sentence structure or the same clauses, one after the other, same way said. So you create a kind of poetic rhythm. And I've always said that good prose writers are really failed poets. And that's the trick. You better be a failed poet first and accept the fact that you're a failed poet and move on to prose.
Will Find Me become a movie?
Who's asking me? Oh, will it become a movie? I wish it did, but nobody said anything yet.
Are Timothy and Armie Hammer going to play the older versions of themselves? I can't see Timothy as an older man.
That's what the director is saying, but he's going to have to wait another 10 years. And I may not be around, okay?
We have a question here. Hi, I'm wondering if you ever find yourself skimming the surface of a character or an experience and needing to go deeper and struggling to do that, and then how do you find your way in those moments?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
So if you're ever writing a character and you feel like you're not fully investigating their experience,
Yes.
that there's some part of you that's being shallow as you're writing.
Yes.
How do you repair that?
It means that you're not interested, right? In other words, I don't care. One of the characters that I couldn't understand and is so important is Oliver. I could never understand Oliver. I couldn't understand his motivation. So I didn't give him much to say. I wasn't interested in him. I was interested in Elio's perception of Oliver and how Elio is constantly decoding and trying to understand who this man is when he's wearing a red bathing suit or a green bathing suit. Because he's created this fantasy that when he wears a different color, he becomes someone else. And he might, I don't know. But Oliver never interested me. So I was usually not being very profound with Oliver because I couldn't. I didn't know the character, and frankly, I wasn't very interested in him. I was interested in the parent. Look at the mother, for example, the mother of Elio. What do we know about her? In the film, she's fantastic. In my book, she's almost like a shadow. She has absolutely no role. And yet I have very, very strong women in many of my books. But that particular moment, the mother was incidental. There was more to say about the maid than there was about the mother.
Over here.
Hi.
Hi. First, I'd like to say that a few years ago when I first read Call Me By Your Name, when I got to the last section, my lungs kept closing up. And when I got to the final page, I couldn't even read the words because my eyes were so swelled with tears. And I also have a terrible habit of annotating your book and giving it to ex-lovers.
Not a good thing.
Just for a little torture. I would want to know, for you, what you find more powerful when what you write resonates with yourself or with what you write resonating with so many people like your work has.
I have said once that I didn't understand why people cried at the end of the book. I know I've said that because it's been quoted back at me many, many times. And there's a reason for that, is that as I was writing the book, I got to that moment when I thought about my life and about some people that I've had to say goodbye to. And I didn't want to say goodbye to them, but I had to accept it. And I was thinking of them as I was writing the scene. And it moved me. I was moved. I wasn't crying, but I was moved. And I was glad that I was moved because somehow it moved me to write that sentence, that paragraph, the last paragraph. What happens to a writer, however, is something a bit different. It's you keep rewriting, and I do that all the time. I rewrite, 20, 30 times, sometimes 2, 3 lines, because I want them to have the right cadence and the right meaning and say exactly what I want. After a while, it's like asking an actor, when he's played this particular role millions of times, does he feel it? He knows how to make it seem as if he feels it, but he doesn't feel it anymore because he's overworked it. And I have overworked so many passages that are very moving and were written probably from my gut. By the time I finish the book, they are gone silent. That's why I have to write another book, because I want that feeling again. And so you resurrect new stories or new plots in order to reignite yourself. But then it goes away. So I do understand why people are moved, because they're reading it for the first time. I've reread it, I don't have to tell you.
First of all, right here.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for your writing. It really is just thank you. But I was wondering, your writing's so beautiful because it has such a, I feel like we really kind of delve into the characters' brains, and they have such a vibrant inner dialogue, inner thoughts. And I was just wondering if, when you're in the process of writing, do you usually find that you become sort of a conduit for the characters to speak through, or do you craft them and then that's how they are kind of built and shaped? Do you build the characters, or do they just speak through you?
I don't know. I mean, I hate to sound so flippant, but it's difficult to say, because as you're writing, you have to borrow who they are. You have to say, if he's in that, you don't think it this way, but that's what's really going on. If he's in that situation, what would he think? And I love, in fact, for me, writing thought is terribly easy, whereas writing plot is impossible. I am a terrible plot writer because I don't know how to write plot, and I'm not interested in plot. I want people who are thinking and who are basically desiring, or whatever it is. And so I want to catch them in their moment of desire. Now, can I portray desire of a particular sort, of a particular sort of inclination, without having experienced it myself? Maybe, maybe not. Sometimes I borrow from myself. Sometimes I'm imagining what someone would feel. But then it has to be persuasive. And in the act of making it persuasive, I begin to live that part. So I become a kind of method actor at that moment. So it's many, many things happening simultaneously. That's why it's not an easy thing. But to say that this is something I have to have lived in order to render it to the reader is artificial. That's not how it works. You usually immerse yourself in the character and say, maybe this is what he would have done. And now that I've made that maybe, I need to believe it. And how do I make the reader believe it?
Hi. I've got a question actually from my friend. He wanted me to ask it. He's a huge fan of yours, and he just wants to know if you're writing now something new, because he says that he misses you very much.
Already?
Yes.
We have a new book out. Okay.
yeah. He wants the next one.
Yes, I am writing something. I'm always producing things, but I am writing another book. But I don't want to go into it because I don't know if it's got a life yet.
When we heard that Find Me was coming out, we were obviously all excited to see Oliver and Elio have their happily ever after. How tempted were you to not give that to us? And further, was the writing of Find Me affected by our response to Call Me By Your Name?
Or to the movie?
Both, yeah.
Okay. No, actually, no. I didn't want... The last thing I wanted was to find myself owing anything to the film or to Call Me By Your Name. I wanted to go into a different direction. I wanted to explore, the father. I wanted to explore Elio at, 32 and Oliver at the age of 44. I wanted to move on and move away. The only thing, and I say this with a great deal of pride and arrogance, that the only thing I took from the film was the name of Sammy. Because I needed to give him a name, and I didn't know what to call him. And if I gave him a different name, then it would have been sort of anticlimactic, as it were. So I colluded there. But part of the question is, what is the second part of the question, though I forgot it?
Our response to
the
reading of Call Me By Your Name.
No, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to respond because, to be honest with you, I received, after Call Me By Your Name, and still goes on, I receive a lot of fan fiction. So people telling me, you should do this. Here, I've sent you 10 pages of this. I cannot even look at it because if I do, by mistake, sort of slip and borrow something, you'll sue me, okay? So I don't do that. So, but people send me fan fiction because they want. So I don't want to listen to what anybody says. And in fact, one of the responses, and you probably know this, one of the disappointments that people have in Find Me is that it doesn't give you Elio and Oliver right away. In fact, it cheats you, and it makes you think that this is Elio speaking in the first person, whereas it's really the father. And I wanted you to stumble, because I didn't want this to be like the sequel, son of Call Me By Your Name. Okay? I didn't want that. So I resisted it as much as I could, which is why I think that in many ways the book is not so much a sequel as a companion or an inspiration of Call Me By Your Name. Yes, also. Which one is? Fine. You think it's more hopeful? Yeah. Okay.
Last question right here.
Okay.
You yourself are not gay, correct?
Yes.
And there's a lot of people, I think, in the writing and film community that feel that stories need to be told by the people who lived them. And, I don't know personally if you did experience a gay love in your past, but what do you say in response to those people who feel like straight writers should write about straight things and gay writers should write about gay things?
Well, I understand the point, and I understand in particular this particular issue becomes vibrant and important in the show business, in the movie and theater business, where I understand that there is a paucity of maybe not enough gay people getting roles and they go to straight people. But the answer I can give you is that, can you imagine Elio being played by someone else? That's the thing. In other words, does he have to be gay in order to be? He's an actor. And an actor acts. He doesn't have to be himself. But that's a very tricky situation in the film business. It becomes incidental, I think, when it comes to books itself, because at that point, you create a scenario, you create a situation. Then you have to. I'll give you a ridiculous option. Is if Dostoevsky is writing about hacking a woman to death, and hacking her sister to death too, since she stepped into the room, does he have to be an assassin in order to write that book? And the answer is clearly no, because in the writing business, and it's the only business I care about, it becomes immaterial. But in films, I understand there's much more at stake. And I understand that. I mean, should the roles have gone to a gay person? I don't know. But I'm very happy it went to the people it did.
So we will finish the evening right now, and you'll be signing books, yes?
Yes.
So what we'll do is we'll make a line right here, and everybody can get in line. And he'll be here to sign your books. And thank you for coming.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you.